The life of Vincent van Gogh was marked by intense colors and deep pains. A man who transformed the chaos of his own soul into eternal art, but who never experienced in life the recognition that today everyone attributes to him. In his emptiness, we discover a mirror for our own anguish. Because, at some point, we all ask ourselves, what is the meaning of living when the world seems indifferent? What to do when the emptiness surrounds us and hope seems to disappear? Van Gogh does not offer us ready answers, but he shows us, through his life and his work, that the very act of existing can be a form of resistance. This video is an invitation to dive into the philosophy of pain and emptiness through the journey of Van Gogh. Here, we will explore how suffering can be transformed into creation, how solitude can reveal authenticity, and how even in despair we can find a spark of life. If themes such as psychology, philosophy, and the darkness of the human soul interest you, subscribe now to the channel. From which place in the world are you watching this video now? Leave your answer in the comments. Adulthood arrives like an avalanche. They promised answers, but delivered more questions. Work, bills, relationships, body and mind in collapse all at the same time. It is like being trapped on a carousel spinning too fast, trying to smile while the stomach begs to stop. Who has never asked, how am I supposed to handle all this without going insane? Van Gogh knew the weight of this chaos. Life seemed to swallow every moment, transforming the simple act of existing into battle. Emptiness does not arise suddenly. It accumulates like invisible dust on furniture. One day you wake up and realize that everything seems colorless, as if the world had been faded, and at that moment even breathing may sound like an impossible task. But there is a strange irony in this. The more we try to organize the chaos, the more it escapes us. Life insists on being disobedient, full of unforeseen events. It is like trying to hold water with your hands. The more force, the less remains. Is it not curious how the most fragile things in life, time, love, meaning, are also the hardest to hold? Those who feel too much perceive this weight even more intensely. A comment cuts like a knife. A silence becomes an abyss. A failure seems like a sentence. And while others seem to live lightly, you feel crushed by every detail. It is like carrying a piano on your back, while everyone around you dances to the same music. And here comes a paradox. It is precisely this sensitivity, which so often seems like a curse, that also brings us closer to beauty. Van Gogh, at the height of despair, still found colors in chaos. While the world said nothing made sense, he insisted on painting meaning into the simplest things. Perhaps that is why his works still speak to us, even centuries later. After all, is it not curious? When life seems meaningless, it is in the detail that we find refuge. A color in the sky, a smell of coffee, a song playing softly on the bus. The present, so ordinary, can be the antidote against emptiness. But to see this, it is necessary to stop running, to stop fighting against chaos, and simply look. How many times have you found yourself staring at the ceiling, not knowing what to do with your own life? The mind melts into unanswered questions, while the heart only asks for rest. In these moments, it is not the future that saves, nor the past. It is the now, this small instant, that can turn into a miracle. Chaos does not disappear, but it can transform into landscape. Van Gogh discovered this not at the peak of glory, but in the depths of the abyss, interned in a hospital. He painted flowers while the world around collapsed, not because he had answers, but because he needed to survive his own emptiness. And perhaps this is the key. When life makes no sense, it is precisely there that the possibility of creating one begins. When life seems meaningless, the first reaction is to run away, to flee from emptiness, from discomfort, from questions that have no answers. But Van Gogh shows us that it is precisely by facing this pain head-on that we can begin to see something beyond. He did not ignore his suffering. He transformed it, painting colors that no one else saw. It is like discovering that pain is, at the same time, fertile ground. His art was almost a silent scream. Each brushstroke carried a fragment of his anguish, but also of his hope. How many times have you tried to create something, anything, just to feel that you still existed? This search for meaning does not need to be grand. Sometimes a simple drawing, a diary, a song is enough to rescue the thread of connection with life, and it is curious how suffering can become a teacher. Van Gogh learned from every fall, from every frustration, as if each pain carried a hidden lesson. Life insists on testing our limits. But those who observe closely discover that even chaos has patterns, even emptiness reveals paths. It is like playing a difficult game. Each mistake teaches you something new. Each defeat brings you closer to a better strategy. The problem is that many people expect meaning to come ready, as if it were an easy recipe. But Van Gogh shows us that meaning needs to be conquered, forged in the midst of the storm. He did not wait for applause, nor for immediate recognition. He painted because he needed to, because life demanded that something be done. And perhaps deep down, this is what saves us. Action instead of waiting. In seeking meaning, we come across our own solitude. Van Gogh felt this intensely, but he did not let solitude be only suffering. He used it as a companion of creation, as a mirror to see his own soul. How many times have you felt alone but realized that solitude brought clarity, perception, self-knowledge? It is in this empty space that meaning begins to arise, almost without warning. The present becomes a stage for small miracles, a color on the horizon, a gesture of kindness, a detail that no one notices. Everything can be meaning if we learn to see. Van Gogh reminds us that meaning is not in the distant future or in the past that does not return. It is here, now, hidden in the subtleties that go unnoticed to those who run too much. And it is precisely this search that gives shape to life. Each attempt to understand, each moment of attention to the present transforms chaos into landscape, emptiness into fertile ground. It is not easy. No one said it would be, but life without meaning begins to gain contours when we allow ourselves to feel, reflect, and create from what hurts us. Deep down, the lesson of Van Gogh is simple and profound. Meaning is not found. It is built piece by piece, even when everything seems to collapse. Each gesture, each color, each instant lived with attention is a brick in the construction of this meaning. And if we begin to see it this way, perhaps the next step, the next chapter of life, already awaits us with surprises we cannot yet imagine. Many times, those who feel intensely feel alone in the world. Van Gogh lived this feeling like no one else. His emotions were too wide, his view of life too intense. He realized that the world was not prepared for so much sensitivity, that most people lived in pale colors, without risking to feel the chaos of existence. How many times have you felt out of place simply for being who you are? This lack of understanding corrodes little by little, like water that wears away stone. Friends do not understand, family worries, society judges. Van Gogh suffered from this daily, but instead of molding himself, he remained faithful to his own essence. There is a silent strength in refusing to become a copy of what the world expects. It is uncomfortable, yes, but also liberating. Authenticity, however, requires courage. Each decision to be true to yourself is a small act of revolution against the emptiness that conformity brings. Van Gogh painted what he felt, even if no one saw or understood. Each brushstroke was a manifesto of his truth and you. What have you left undone for fear of the judgment of others? And here is the paradox. The more we move away from the expectation of others, the closer we come to ourselves. Van Gogh discovered that chosen solitude is not suffering, but fertile ground for growth. It is in the freedom of being misunderstood that clarity, insight, the meaning that no one else can give you, emerges. But it is difficult not to give in to the pressure of the world. The fear of being rejected, of seeming strange or failed, is real. Van Gogh felt this, but he transformed each rejection into art, each criticism into fuel. He understood that the pain of incomprehension is not a sign of weakness, but an invitation to the deepest expression of who you are. And this deep expression connects us, even in unexpected ways. The world may not understand immediately, but authentic emotions have their own language. They arrive silently, crossing time and space, touching hearts that recognize what is genuine. It is like throwing a message in a bottle into the ocean, without knowing who will read it, but believing that someone will find it. Authenticity also requires patience. Van Gogh knew that his vision would take time to be understood, that his value would be recognized only after his life. The lesson is clear. It is not about immediate approval, but about constancy in living and creating from inner truth. Each authentic step builds your own story, even in the midst of incomprehension. And in the end, what matters is not being accepted, but being true. Van Gogh teaches us that when life makes no sense, authenticity is the thread that keeps us connected to ourselves. And if we begin to allow ourselves this freedom, perhaps we will discover that the next step, the next gesture, can finally transform chaos into something worth living. Van Gogh shows us that pain does not need to be only suffering. It can become creation. Each brushstroke of his carried not only colors, but fragments of his most intense emotions. It is as if the paint were a direct channel to his soul, allowing the internal chaos to turn into something concrete, understandable, and beautiful. Who has never felt relieved by putting on paper what cannot be said in words? Creation works as a mirror of the soul. Painting, writing, playing music, or any form of expression allows us to better understand our own suffering. Van Gogh transformed solitude into sunflowers, sadness into turbulent skies, agony into vibrant colors. It is almost magical. By externalizing pain, we realize that it does not completely dominate us, that there is a control we can exercise. And the most fascinating thing is that creation connects. Although many did not understand Van Gogh in life, his works touched people centuries later. There is something universal in the way authentic feelings communicate, even silently. Each creative act is a bridge that links the individual experience to the world, showing that pain can also generate shareable beauty. Transforming pain into creation requires courage. It is necessary to face feelings that we normally ignore, look at them directly, and decide to express them. Van Gogh did this daily, without guarantees of understanding or recognition. And each attempt teaches us something about resilience, even when everything seems to collapse. Creating is a way of surviving, of affirming that we are here. The act of creation also gives meaning to chaos. When everything seems aimless, painting, writing, or creating something allows us to organize internal confusion, to give name and shape to what we feel. Van Gogh reminds us that meaning is not given, it is built from what is most intimate to us. Every artistic gesture is an attempt to give color to a world that often seems to gray, and it is in this practice that we find small miracles. A finished painting, a song played, a poem written, these are signs that we managed to transform something heavy into lightness. Van Gogh did not seek fame, he sought to exorcise emptiness, to find balance, to survive his own chaos. It is an invitation for all of us to create even if no one sees, even if no one understands. The beauty of creation lies in authenticity. It is not about pleasing, impressing, or gaining approval. Van Gogh teaches us that the act of creating, in itself, is already redemption, an intimate dialogue between us and life. It is there, in the simple gesture of placing emotion into the world, that we find meaning even if for a fleeting moment, but genuine. And when we realize this, the next step becomes clear. Life, even without apparent meaning, can be transformed into something that pulses, that communicates, that touches. And Van Gogh leaves us with a silent but powerful lesson. Pain is not an obstacle. It is fuel to create, to connect, to give life to what seems lost. Van Gogh shows us that to live intensely is to accept feeling everything, even what hurts. Joy and sadness mix like paints on a palette, creating nuances that no one else can reproduce. Those who truly feel know that every emotion is fuel, that every moment lived with intensity leaves invisible but deep marks. It is not about suffering for the sake of suffering, but about allowing life to pass through us without filters. This intensity brings a paradox. The more we feel, the more vulnerable we become. Van Gogh felt every look, every word, every silence, as if they were waves crashing against fragile stones. But it is precisely in this vulnerability that strength exists. The more we allow ourselves to feel, the more we perceive the depth of existence itself and the complexity of the world around us. And the curious thing is that intensity does not need to be dramatic to be true. A simple gesture, a moment of full attention, a sunset observed without haste. All of this is living with depth. Van Gogh captured these subtleties in his paintings, showing that the extraordinary is hidden in the everyday. Every detail matters. Every moment carries meaning. To live intensely also requires courage to face the unknown. Van Gogh immersed himself in experiences, explored places and people, even when there was no guarantee of understanding. Intensity is, many times, a conscious choice to accept life as it is, with chaos, beauty, and pain, and to decide to cross it with open eyes and an attentive heart. And it is in this immersion that we find clarity about ourselves. The more we feel, the more we perceive our limits, desires, and passions. Van Gogh teaches us that life is not measured only by external achievements, but by the depth with which we relate to every moment. Every emotion experienced is a reflection that we are truly alive. Intensity also connects us to others in a genuine way. Those who feel deeply recognize emotions in others, understand pain and joy more sensitively. Van Gogh, even misunderstood, left traces of empathy and humanity in his works, touching those who had eyes and hearts to see. It is a reminder that intensity creates connection, even silent. However, living like this is not easy. It requires accepting that chaos and emptiness are part of the experience, that pain is not a sign of failure, but of humanity. Van Gogh teaches us that intensity does not fade, but transforms into something creative, into expression, into legacy. Every feeling fully lived is a step in building a life that truly matters. And when we understand this, life, even when without apparent meaning, begins to pulse in another way. Van Gogh shows us that feeling deeply is not a burden, but an opportunity to give color, meaning, and presence to what surrounds us. It is at this point that the search for authenticity and the intensity of living intersect, preparing us for the next step. Van Gogh shows us that solitude does not need to be an enemy. It can be an ally. Being alone gives space to listen to our own heart, to perceive the flow of emotions, and to see what goes unnoticed in the rush of the world. Those who always live surrounded by people may end up losing themselves in others' opinions, but in solitude arises the opportunity to reconnect with oneself. Solitude, when chosen, transforms chaos into clarity. Van Gogh spent hours painting while the world seemed invisible around him. He found in isolation the freedom to feel, to explore his ideas, and to create without barriers. It is curious how silence can be so deafening for some and so revealing for others, depending on how we relate to it. And this relationship with solitude requires courage. It is not easy to face our own mind, to look inward and accept all the imperfections that dwell there. Van Gogh lived this intensely, but realized that only in this space was it possible to touch his own essence. Solitude then becomes a field of learning, where every moment of introspection builds self-knowledge and inner strength. It is in solitude that we find authenticity. When no one watches, there are no masks, no external expectations, only ourselves. Van Gogh teaches us that the most genuine moments arise in this intimate space, where we can feel the world fully without needing to please, impress, or justify. Every isolated brushstroke was an act of truth. And the most fascinating thing is that solitude intensifies the perception of the present. Being alone allows us to see details that go unnoticed amid noise. The light of an afternoon, the smell of rain, the movement of trees. Van Gogh captured these subtleties like no one else, transforming small moments into experiences that echo centuries later. Solitude also strengthens emotional resilience. Those who learn to be alone, to deal with their own thoughts and emotions, discover that they can face chaos without depending on external validation. Van Gogh, even misunderstood and rejected, found in solitude the fuel to keep creating and living. It is a reminder that strength is not outside, but within each one of us. However, balance is necessary. Chosen solitude is different from imposed solitude. Van Gogh shows us that being alone can be liberating, but also requires discipline and awareness. It is necessary to learn to dive into this space without getting lost, transforming it into an ally for creation, for self-knowledge, and for finding meaning. And when we understand this, we realize that life without apparent meaning can become fertile ground for discovery and transformation. Van Gogh teaches us that isolation, introspection, and silence are not voids, but doors to depth, preparing us for the next step, to give shape to our own existence through intensity and creation. Van Gogh teaches us that the chaos of life can be transformed into beauty. Every whirlwind of emotions, every moment of despair or confusion can be reinterpreted and reframed. He saw colors and forms where others saw only destruction and disorder. It is an invitation to look at our own lives with the eyes of one who realizes that chaos can also generate art. Beauty is not only in what is perfect, but in what is authentic. Van Gogh painted turbulent skies, undulating fields, imperfect sunflowers, and this shows us that imperfection has its own charm. Those who learn to see beauty in chaos understand that every flaw, every pain, every confusing moment is part of the mosaic of life. And the curious thing is that this perception changes everything. When we begin to seek beauty even in difficult moments, life ceases to be just a burden. Van Gogh transformed abysses into landscapes, solitude into vibrant colors. It is almost an exercise of emotional alchemy, transforming suffering into something that pulses, that communicates, and that touches the soul. Finding beauty in chaos also connects us with the present. It is in the now that every detail gains meaning. the wind on the face, the sound of rain, the warmth of the sun. Van Gogh reminds us that life is made of these small moments, and that recognizing their beauty is the first step to giving meaning to everything that seems aimless. And, at the same time, this requires courage. Courage to face despair without running away, to look at confusion and realize that it can contain light. Van Gogh did not choose escape. He chose to paint, to choose colors, to create forms. Every gesture was an affirmation that life, no matter how chaotic, can be transformed into something meaningful. Beauty in chaos is, above all, subjective. What is beautiful to Van Gogh may not be to another, but it is precisely this that gives power to the experience. Each one can discover their own way of transforming pain into art. This personal search is one of the keys to finding meaning even when everything seems lost. And this transformation has a profound effect on ourselves. By seeing beauty in chaos, we learn to deal better with intense emotions, to embrace life in its entirety without trying to control every detail. Van Gogh teaches us that meaning is not imposed from outside, but emerges from within, from those who allow themselves to feel and create. And when we begin to apply this vision, every new challenge in life ceases to be just an obstacle. Chaos becomes raw material for growth, learning, and expression. Van Gogh shows us that beauty is not the absence of pain, but the ability to transform this pain into something that pulses and survives beyond us. Van Gogh shows us that even when life seems meaningless, every gesture matters. Painting, feeling, creating, existing, all contribute to an invisible legacy that surpasses time. The feeling of emptiness does not need to paralyze. It can be a catalyst, a silent force that drives us to leave marks, even if small, in the world. The deepest learning comes from direct experience, not from theories or advice. Van Gogh lived every emotion intensely, learned from every fall, every rejection, and every moment of solitude. He teaches us that the meaning of life is not found, but built in practice, in the choices we make when facing chaos and it is curious to realize how his story still resonates today. People who never knew him feel his truth through the colors and forms he left behind. Every painting is testimony that authenticity and the courage to feel deeply echo far beyond one's own life. Emptiness may exist, but it does not need to be the last chapter. Van Gogh also teaches us about persistence. Even ignored, misunderstood, and suffering deeply, he continued creating, living, and expressing his truth. This reminds us that life without apparent meaning can still be filled with action, intention, and authentic expression. Every day lived with attention is a brick in the legacy we leave behind. The intensity of living, the search for authenticity, the courage to face solitude, all intertwine in the construction of meaning. Van Gogh shows us that there is no easy path, but every step, every choice, every gesture of creation brings us closer to a fuller existence, even if marked by pain and uncertainty. And this lesson applies to any of us. When we feel that nothing makes sense, we can choose to create, to feel, to live with intensity, and to seek beauty in chaos. It is in this process that we discover that emptiness is not the absence of life, but the opportunity to build it in a genuine and meaningful way. Van Gogh's legacy is not only in the canvases, but in the example of someone who faced chaos, pain, and incomprehension without giving up. He shows us that to live fully is an act of courage, and that even in the shadows of emptiness, we can paint colors that resonate far beyond us. And so, we learn that the meaning of life is not given, but woven from every moment lived with intensity, authenticity, and creativity. Van Gogh reminds us that even when everything seems meaningless, there is always the possibility of transforming pain into expression, chaos into beauty, and emptiness into legacy. Van Gogh's life shows us that emptiness is not just an abyss, but also a space for creation. He suffered, fell, got up, and kept painting, even without applause, even without certainties. His legacy proves that even in the silence of solitude, we can build something that resonates for generations. The meaning of life is not found as a ready-made answer, but woven into every gesture, every choice, every act of courage in the face of chaos. Van Gogh teaches us that even when the world does not recognize us, living with intensity and authenticity is, in itself, a revolutionary act. Perhaps emptiness never completely disappears, but it can be transformed into colors, into expression, into life. And it is precisely in this transformation that we discover that we do not live in vain. Van Gogh did not have recognition in life, but left us the eternal reminder that, despite pain, there is always beauty to be created. These two videos in front of you are not here by chance. And what if everything you believe about yourself is only a reflection of someone's gaze? Click now on one of the videos beside and begin to break this mirror. You will have to risk the click. So, which one will you choose?